And I walked in and I remember all the kids stopping and their heads swiveling and looking at me. And I felt like an outsider. I remember secondary school. My school had one child that everyone bullied, and that child was me. He just turned to me and said, I can't take you seriously as a trans person because you've not changed your name.
How does the way you dress impact the way you express yourself?
I think of clothing as an extension of me, and I am an extension of them. It's a symbiotic relationship. And especially if we're marginalized individuals, it's activism leaving the house. It's activism being visible. And that is something that we should honor and stop and, be proud of.
Always amazed by people that write, because me being dyslexic, I couldn't think of anything worse. What would you say to a young person on the beginning, their journey of discovering themselves? What advice do you wish you had when you were going through it?
Oh my God, what a question.
Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Ben with us. Ben, do you just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself?
Thank you for having me. My name is Ben Pechey. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a non-binary author, presenter, DI consultant, and LGBTQI+ educator. Essentially, I do lots of different things.
I love this because me and Ben are quite similar in terms of so many different things and some fingers in so many different pies, and it makes for a really interesting conversation. So I just wanted to open up with telling us a bit about your story this far and the journey you've been on, and just sort of giving us a bit of your early context.
So it's a really interesting question, and I can remember my first day at school like it was yesterday, and it took me a long time to actually enter school because they couldn't peel me off my mom. But when they eventually did, it was gone lunchtime, so everyone else was already settled in, the tears had died down, everyone was happy and settled, and I walked in and I remember all the kids stopping and their heads swiveling and looking at me. And I felt like an outsider. And I felt like an outsider ever since. And so that's 26 years ago. And nothing's really, really changed for me. And I guess in my journey in my early years, there was a perceived difference about me, something that I couldn't articulate at the time, but everyone seemed to know about me. Everyone seemed to have this perception of me, and it's something that I couldn't vocalize. I couldn't seem to understand. So from a really young age, I absorbed the idea that I was somehow bad, different, not acceptable, not palatable. And that was something that I've held on to for a really, really long time. And that lasted all the way to being an adult. And I think it's a thread that a lot of queer people have in their lives of we are pushed to the sidelines and have our identity shown back to us in a mirror as a bad thing, which I don't think is helpful.
100%. And I think one of the big things with the discussion of how we treat people that may seem different or may identify differently is just a little bit of compassion, guys. It's not rocket science. It's we can, why does it end up being this big production of you have to explain everything? And I know I say that as a disabled person who advocates for we should talk about disability, we should be open and we should be honest and all that, but also it's having that level of compassion of if someone doesn't want to talk about it. I'm a big advocate for sort of, what's the word, pointing to someone who is comfortable. So for example, if you're not comfortable talking about your disability, or particularly in my case, cerebral palsy, point to someone who will, because there's a big thing to give of education, because people only know what they know, and you have to have a level of understanding of, they might make a comment that's naive and a bit, whoa, okay, we need to unpack that, but also understanding if it's come from a good place and it was just a general, you don't know a better way to say it, then that's something we need to do. But I think as well, this whole thing of not being fearful of the unknown, it's just having a level of understanding and a level of empathy. And it's amazing that you've gone through that journey and you're still battling with it now. And I know things have got slightly better, but there's a long way for us to go. But I think it's so interesting you explaining your journey younger and knowing that so early on. I can imagine it was quite daunting as well, because you couldn't put your finger on it yourself, but then everyone else was making assumptions.
Yeah, daunting is the right word. And that's maybe the nice version of it. It was incredibly traumatic. You know, I remember secondary school. My school had one child that everyone bullied, and that child was me. And it wasn't just the kids, it was the teachers as well. Like, I was a problem. And I remember when the bullying got bad enough that, like, my parents had to be called, and the school actively told me that it was, like, my fault. I was perpetuating it. So, like, instead of trying to deal with bullying, I was given counseling to, like, cope with myself. And it's such a disorientating experience because I was, like, 13. I didn't really understand what was happening. You know, I know that we can have conversations about gender with 4-year-olds, but at 13, I didn't really fully know who I was. I didn't have the language or the representation to point to, and yet everyone around me is telling me that I'm wrong and I've got to fix myself. So, to use your word again, daunting, I basically took it as I should blend in and I should do everything I could to not stand out. So I stopped trying, especially at school. I just wouldn't raise my hand if I needed help. I wouldn't, because I stuck out so much. I was like, I've got to blend in as much as I can. And it means that there's huge gaps in my education because I just didn't get the help that I needed. And it's daunting in the sense that I was severely limited because I used what I was told about myself, and it really was a detriment to me.
I think it's really interesting what you just said as well, because I can see so much of it when I think of my disability context. Particularly, mine was a little bit different. So the way I presented was, I knew I was different, and I knew I was in a situation where I was quite fortunate. Family didn't treat me any differently or anything like that. But I knew as soon as I went into school, I was like, okay, yeah, definitely different. Particularly secondary school, that transition was a little bit tricky for me. But I went into a state of like, as you're probably figuring it out now, I'm quite chatty, quite loud, quite bubbly. But I emphasized I was the first one to crack jokes. I was always the loud one because I wanted to be liked by everyone, and then that became a problem because I became a people pleaser, wanting to get in with everyone rather than finding what I now call finding your tribe and finding the people that you actually clicked with. I just wanted everyone to like me, and therefore I was like being a constant chameleon and constantly like, oh, I can do that. I like this topic. I can talk about this topic, when actually half the time couldn't be asked or didn't care. Yeah.
I feel like that's exhausting. I feel like we, in many shapes and forms, we mask, we present the version we think will serve us best. And, you know, even now, I think to a certain extent, even, you know, we're probably further on with our journeys, more comfortable, more accepting in spaces that we want to be in. But we probably still find ourselves going into situations and we have to mask. Like medical situations for me is something where I have to, like, I think about it. Do I need to dress down? Like I was at the hospital this week and I was like, should I like try and be like quote unquote normal? And I realized I don't own a pair of jeans. I was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know.
I mean, to be fair, I say this, and I say this with pure love. I'm envious of like the like gumption you've got to wear with what you got. Because I sit there and go, I really do need to spice things up and do a little different. And every time I'm like, safe, gonna go back to safe. I have always, my parents and friends always joke that I'm Mr. Black, beige, sludge, dark colours. But I think that comes from ginger hair, because there's two types of gingers. There's the ones that are like, fuck it, I'm gonna wear whatever I like, and then there's the ones going, that's a clash, we can't do that, we don't do that.
Right, my life is a clash, so that's what I roll with. I don't know what beige means.
I love that though. I think I'm getting better. I like adding one of my new things that I like is statement pieces. So for anyone that doesn't know, and I think some people might have seen it on my socials, me and my partner created, the theme of the party was purple. So we made these like metallic, got a pair of shoes from Primark, made these metallic purple boots, and they are huge. In my wheelchair, they feel like platforms.
Yeah.
But that is what I've started to lean into, is going down the route of like doing something a little bit different. So I am getting better, just need to improve further.
I'm excited for you. It's a great place to be.
But on that note, like, you've actually helped me onto one of the questions I was going to ask you, and this was going to come in later, but it fits quite nicely, is how does the way you dress impact the way you express yourself? You very much, from what I can see, you use fashion to express your personality and so on. How has that been impacted by your non-binary journey, and how does it help you express yourself?
So clothes are really, really important to me, which is not to say that they're the be all and end all, because they're not, because at the end of the day, they are just fabric. But I think of clothing as structure, like scaffolding. So they help me be the best version of myself. I've had people in the past say to me, oh, you mean fake it till you make it? And I'm like, not at all. Not at all. They are an extension of me, and I am an extension of them. It's a symbiotic relationship. We help each other out. And I like to call myself the Lorraine Kelly of the trans community.
Love that.
Now, if you're not too sure what that means, Lorraine Kelly, in a recent tax case, asserted that she plays herself on national television, and she's playing a role. She performs as Lorraine Kelly, and it was upheld, and that's the decision that the court went with. I use, on days where I find the world difficult, I use my clothing, makeup, hair, whatever it is. I put it on and I'm performing as me. I am the best, most confident, most at ease person I can be. And having that to help me get ready, I find is so useful to me. And so in that sense, clothing is armor, because it protects you and it holds you up. That's not to say that I'm not confident and I'm not the best version of myself. All I'm saying is, when you are marginalized or anything other than a completely healthy cis white man, life is really damn hard sometimes. And so I use what I can to make it more bearable. And so clothes are there for me as an identity extender. They say so much, because how we dress is political. And also, like, as a sidebar, it's about joy. It's about pleasure. I remember I was in my first year of university, and I realized that I could do whatever the fuck I wanted, and no one could tell me any other way. And so ever since then, I have just always answered questions about pleasure with the word yes. Do I want to try that? Yes, I will. I'm not saying every decision has been a good one. I thought skin tight latex trousers would be like a great Thursday afternoon option for a lecture. No, they were not. But like, apart from like a few fashion mistakes, it's led to a really great relationship with myself. So clothing is a huge part of my journey.
And I hear that completely. I mean, again, I relate to it because one of the main reasons I'm obsessed with shoes is because I can't walk. So my thing was, people were going to stare at my feet, so let's give them something to stare at. And then literally, honestly, every friend, family member always goes to me, for a guy that can't walk, Jesus, you've got so many shoes. Why? And I'm like, look,
brilliant.
But they don't die. That's the worst thing. It's like everyone else is like, oh, mine wear out, mine this, mine that. And I'm like, I mean, they do wear out if I use my walking frame, but other than that, they're pristine.
Live forever.
And it's worse because I sit there and go, every Christmas or birthday, I'm like, oh, I really want to ask for these pair of shoes. But everyone's going to judge me and go, you don't need another pair of shoes.
As long as you've got the space, I don't see any issue whatsoever. Have the shoes.
Although I am running out of space.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's like, which ones are gonna fall so that the new ones can come in?
Yeah. Yeah. I understand.
And then the other thing I wanted to speak to you about as well is I really want to highlight, obviously, you highlighted at the beginning a very difficult journey through growing up. And then to the amazing person that you are now, you have, as we said at the beginning, you got your hand in so many pies. And I just wanted to speak to you about your journey with your book is the first one I want to ask. Your book about being non-binary and the journey of it. And I just wanted to see where the idea came from and the journey with writing it. Because I'm always amazed by people that write, because me being dyslexic, I couldn't think of anything worse, but then it's something that I really want to do because people say they get so much, it's hard, but they get so much joy out of it. So I just wanted you to speak on your journey with it.
So it might surprise you to know that I am cripplingly dyslexic.
Love that. I love that. I'm not the only one.
Not at all. And throughout education, writing was something I really struggled with. Like I failed like my mock GCSEs, I got like an E, and my mum basically, the school wouldn't help me. They were like, we're absolutely not helping. It's too late for anything. So my mum got me through everything, and I learned to really enjoy writing, and I found it as a really useful tool of expression. And so when it came to writing the book, I was getting really frustrated that resources for trans and non-binary people always existed in the fray, in the argument. It was very much a discourse of the issues as opposed to speaking to us as people, you know, quite often. And I'm sure you'll understand this from like your intersections. Like trans people were spoken about, we're not spoken to, like we're ignored. And I'd had enough. I'd absolutely had enough. And I wanted to create a resource that existed outside of that conversation, outside of that discourse. You know, because there's loads of resources out there, but you have to wade through some real shit and fake news and like really questionable sources. And it means it's really impossible not to, in the effort to educate yourself about yourself, to also then not hate yourself at the same time. And so my first book, The Book of Non-Binary Joy, really came from a place of, I want you to stop and celebrate yourself right now. I want to give you the resources and the information and the experience that I gained and that helped me. And I want you to live right now. I'm not saying you've got to learn and change and be better. I'm saying, as you are right now, 100% valid. Let me just give you a little bit more wisdom, a little bit more comfort, some options to help you open up your life. And it's been received really, really well. I get at least one person a week telling me how much it's helped. It's so... writing a book is a really lonely thing because you do it on your own. What you don't realize is once it's in the world, it connects you to people all the time. So like I'm in bookshops, I'm having conversations with people, they're reading me on the bus, and it's a really humbling exercise in knowing that my voice and my experience is helping people. And it's a gift, an absolute gift. And it's something that I am really, really proud of. And I'd never say that I am grateful for the grief and hassle of what I have been through. And I realized early on that I couldn't undo what had been done to me. But I did realize that I could use that to help other people. It was my line in the sand of, well, I can't change what's happened, but I'll do my damnedest to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that's why I do everything that I do, basically.
I love that. I just want to ask, because I always love hearing these stories, of what has been your favourite message you've received from one of your readers of their story that they've got from your book.
Oh my God, you've really put me on the spot. And not to be like a dick, but there have been so many. It's just like I got one this week, and it's someone who's like just at the start of their journey. They're sort of playing with the idea of pronouns, and they've picked up my book, and they've said that I've given them the confidence to believe in themselves. And that's just the one off the top of my head, but it's the idea that my book has made it possible for someone to go, I'd like an expansive version of life. I'd like to live a little bit more, please. And that's it in a nutshell. It's done its job.
What I love about that message is that works for anyone, because I think one of the things that we do as a species is we're constantly, and guilty as charged, I'm the worst for this, is on to the next one, on to the next one, on to the next one, on to the next one. And we don't actually take a minute to enjoy where we are. Now, there are a multitude of different things that can impact that, the situation, the way you're being treated, so on and so forth. But I think one of the big things that I've learned from doing this pod is we need to zoom out a little bit more every now and again and enjoy the spaces we're in as much as we can in the time that we're in them. Because I think otherwise we can get so lost in two things. One being constantly moving forward, and the other being constantly doubting ourselves and not actually just being our authentic self. And I hate, the worst thing is there's a part of me that hates using that phrase because it feels like such a buzzword and such a like, oh, I'm just going to drop this in because it's cool. But the more I speak to people, the more it's so important, because we're just fast tracking through life and then also not enjoying the wins when we get them, because they can be really small and we can just brush past them, but they are really impactful as well.
I find it really hard. I find it really hard not to feel really disconnected from the things that I've done. And I know this is a podcast and it's not a visual thing, but behind me in my office is my wall of things I have done. So I've got copies of the covers of my book, things that I've done, like doing a TED Talk, to remind me every time I come into my office that no matter how big or small, shit or great my day is, I have done great things and I am building on that body of work. And I think you are totally valid. And it does feel a bit wanky to be like, no, I just need to like be in the moment and bathe in my success. But we do. Yeah. We absolutely should. And especially if we're marginalized individuals, it's activism leaving the house. It's activism being visible. And that is something that we should honor and stop and, be proud of, because it could be very easy to feel like it's all wasted, it's all pointless, there's no reason to carry on. And the fact that we do is something we should pat ourselves on the back for, And also, like, just as like a private note on the side, go to therapy. Everyone should go to therapy.
100%.
If you can get it, that's the gift.
Yeah, 100%, because you learn so much about yourself. Having been in it myself, it's one of those things you always will have the, oh shit, I didn't even know that was a problem. Why? And then you'll realize something about yourself and go, okay, I need to work on that. And one of them was that, because my thing is very much humor around my disability, how much that was a deflection. It was a way of feeling accepted. But I still use it now because I still love watching people turn in their seats when they're like, oh my God, you just said that. And I'm like, yep, I did. But it's so true. I think one of the things I'm really grateful for is I often get wrapped into the not realizing how much I've achieved. One of the things I'm quite grateful for is one of the best people to remind me of what are my best friend Shay, and they're basically sitting there going, but hold on, you've done this, this and this. And the other one is my partner. My partner is constantly going, hang on a second, look at what you've achieved this year, Charlie. Like you're just skipping over it. And I think it's so important to have those people in your lives, or those like systems, like with your wall behind you, of looking at it and going, shit, we've done some cool stuff. And that's a great thing to realize, because then it can give you the energy to go forward.
Absolutely. And I think, like, as a sidebar, I think that we don't do any of this in isolation. And so I've been thinking about it a lot recently, and I think about the space I exist in of trans activism. I can't do this every day, but actually I don't need to, because it's a relay race. And some days I've got the baton and I'm at the front and I'm doing the work. And then other days I don't. And I know that other people have it. And I can rest knowing that it's a community effort. And that's taken me a long time to realize, because sometimes it can feel extremely lonely doing the kind of things that we do, because you don't feel the recognition or the interaction or even the needle of change moving. But whether we're there or not, whether we're passive or active, it is still happening. And so it's knowing actually that success requires you to stop. Success requires you to take a damn day off.
Yep. And it's like I always say, having coming from a sport background, is when the growth happens is when you rest. You can't keep going. And again, I'm going to highlight, I am the biggest hypocrite for that. But it is what people should do, is we should take a break. And it's like I was saying earlier, of developing a referral culture of, if you're having a day where you're not comfortable talking on a topic, or a month or a year or whatever that might be, creating a referral culture where you can direct to another member of the community that's like, he or they or she will just talk your ear off and go for it. Yeah. So
it's so helpful.
And it's so powerful. But I think the biggest challenge is interpretation. When it comes to talking of any marginalized group, everyone has a different view of what we should be focusing on first. Like, my personal opinion is I really find it difficult with the language debate when it comes to disability, because I sit there and go, as someone with a physical disability, I go, but there's bigger problems that we need to fix first. But then that's just my experience, because that's at the forefront of my mind. Like, I constantly bang on this podcast about bloody train stations and getting into them and getting onto trains and how that impacts work. And people are probably sick of hearing it, but that's my journey. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is everyone's experience is different. So everyone's viewpoints are different. And then I think as well, us as a community, we need to kind of respect each other's views. And I think that can be really tricky, because I can understand the frustrations of one person's arguing for this, one person's arguing for that. But then surely we should all be arguing to just progress.
It's a double-edged blade. It's a double-edged blade. But I think a mix of opinion is always really, really helpful, because it allows you to take away your balanced opinion. And I think it's something we have to remind ourselves as well, is we might think people are bored of hearing us speak, or they're like, oh, that's annoying. We don't want to keep going on about a certain topic. But most people have no concept of what our lives are like. They have no concept, and so you actually are doing a good thing by reminding them. And I think as well, it's like really worth mentioning that, you know, we sit in different intersections, but our work crosses over hugely, and it's a Venn diagram. I was at a panel last week about diversity in storytelling, and just before we were about to go on, we had a fire alarm. Now, one of our panel members was in a wheelchair, and it meant that the evacuation process was very difficult and different for them. The building had done the test before, but they'd never actually used the seat before with a person in there. And it left that panelist, an amazing woman called Herda. She was fabulous. And once she had a white wine, when we all got back in and her nerves calmed, it was a really great way of being like, you were all able to walk out that building and I couldn't. That is why we need diverse storytelling. And I was like, that is a perfect example of how our crossovers exist. You know, I had to walk past 2 toilets and they were labeled boys and girls. Everyone else is just going through and not thinking about it. And I'm like, these spaces aren't for me. And it was having someone else's experience shown to me, something that I'd not experienced myself, reminded me, no one actually fully understands what it's like to be pushed to the side by norms and stereotypes. And actually, we should keep on telling them. And having it done in a diverse way, a rich way, multiple ways is only a good thing. Because once someone's like, oh, I've heard this, I don't need to hear about it, I'm like, well, that means you've done the work and you've improved the situation. Otherwise, you're not done hearing about this. You'll never be done hearing about this.
It's so true. It's so true. And it's so important that we come together. I think there's power in numbers is the saying. And I'm going to pull on a really strange thread and ask a quite a naive question. That navigation of being non-binary and being in a situation where a non-binary toilet isn't available.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that? Because I've never even, until you said it, it was one of those moments of, never even thought about how much stress that would cause.
You go for the what can I make the best of this situation? So in that situation, I think, can I find, is there a toilet on the floor? Is there, quite often I end up using disabled toilets, which I have a discomfort with because that space is not for me, firstly and foremostly. Mm-hmm. And then I think about it in terms of my safety, like there's mitigation of risk, or you go to the space that feels the most comfortable and hope for the best. Like many situations I'm sure that you've been in when your needs are not met and you have to like go with the hodgepodge situation that's been created for you.
Yeah.
I go for good enough. I go for what's the best of. And it's just like situations where, you know, people just haven't thought about it. But like I get on a train and the train announcer is like, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm like, well, you're not speaking to me. And that can like present it in fun ways. It's like I can commit crimes on trains because you have not once addressed me and you've told me that I can't do things. You haven't spoken to me, so I can do anything I want. I can go take an extremely large, loud conversation in the quiet coach whilst smoking a cigar because you haven't told me I can't. You haven't once addressed me. And it's just, I think, you can get bogged down in the day-to-day of it and you can absolutely pick life to pieces. I just go for the best approach of like, it's fine and move on, and I'll save my energy for the day where I can't cope with it or a bigger fight that's more important. So it's really about just meeting your own access needs wherever possible.
And I think it's complete, like, actually now going forward, I've never been in the situation, to be fair. I've never come across it. But now you've said it, the idea of the disabled toilet being the most safe option makes complete sense. And I'm like, actually, yeah, that works. Because then my argument always is when I talk about accessible toilets is, guys, why don't we just, make one that's for everyone rather than, because a lot of the time the argument with accessible toilets is, they take up so much space. And you're like, here's an idea. We just have one huge one and then it solves everyone's problems. But
yeah, I think it's a conversation that I think people forget about is when we really go down to the wire and think about like the most marginalized person's rights. I think people assume that we're taking away their rights. And actually what we're doing, surprisingly, is just making a better, more equitable world for everyone. And your comment like about toilets, like the most accessible toilet, more people would enjoy that. More people would feel comfortable, safe, able to actually handle the business they've gone to that space to deal with. It's much more, it's just nicer for everyone. So I think it is always better to consider, because as well, like, and I talk about this a lot because it crosses over, it doesn't take a lot for your world to suddenly get very difficult. Like we could all have something drastically change our circumstance tomorrow. And then by howdy would you know how difficult the world is. So actually we should be thinking about the most accessible needs of everyone. And it just makes it easier for all of us to exist.
100%. And I think that's where the discussion of the social model comes, social versus medical model. I mean, I've voiced my opinion before of like, I have a very strange view of the social medical model because I actually think there's a place for both.
Yes.
In terms of, I always think of it like people like, as much as we don't like labels, people like labels because it gives them a framework to work within. So when I talk of the medical model, when it comes to disability, particularly I've spoke about it a lot in the workplace and recruitment space is if you can give someone who, this guy is an alien, he's just come from nowhere, they don't know anything about disability, then it gives them a framework to work within to know where to sort of look, particularly when you're looking at supporting someone with a disability within a workspace. So that's where I see the medical working in terms of it gives them an idea. Doesn't mean that that's gospel. God, no, don't do that. That's not the
Yeah.
idea, but it gives them an idea of what to look at. Because I think the social model can be quite overwhelming in some respects of like, there's a lot to take in and a lot to consider because you don't realize how wide that scope goes. And then I think that's a very weird tangent to go on. I apologize. But yeah, it's something I discuss a lot of, like, because people go, oh, the social model is gospel. And I'm like,
It depends.
I debate.
There's always context.
100%. Context is massive. I also want to, obviously, we've spoken a lot about disability, and a big part of that is disability and inclusion. And I know you do a lot of work in that space. So I wanted to ask how you got into it and how you got involved with it.
So, COVID is
Really?
where my career comes from. Yeah, because suddenly brands and businesses had all this cash that they were spending up until that point on retail spaces, physical spaces, talent in London. And suddenly they were like, oh shit, we need to find different alternatives. And I just, I got a lot of influx of like, would you speak? Would you appear on this panel? And I realized that I don't have qualifications in the equality sector. I have a lot of life experience, and that is what is missing from the industry. And I realized that I could do things and I could offer an insight that so many brands and businesses just didn't even consider. And that's how I got into this space. And so it means that I am really quite plain in what I do. Is just I go into spaces and say, these are all the things that you are getting wrong. These are all the issues that you are perpetuating. This is how you could do better. And I know it baffles people because it's quite, I work with some really complex systems, one of them being basic human decency. And it's always the thing, I'm like, you could just be nicer.
Yeah.
You could just not be a cunt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is that not your default?
Yeah. It's that whole like childish cliche of like, treat people how you want to be treated. Like, in particularly work context, I always sit there and go, guys, why have we got managers that are dicks? Because like, look, none of us really want to be here. Unless you own the company, none of us really want to be here. So we're all here doing a job because we need to live. And unfortunately, that's the capitalist society we live in.
Yeah.
Maybe if you're happy with that, whatever. But in terms of how we can make people's work lives more joyous, just being a decent human and being like, look, Ben, you're having a rough day and I'm here to support you. That's not saying you're a bad employee, you're a bad person, blah, blah, blah. You're just having a bad day like we always do. And if we can take the pressure off of someone, why don't we? And it's the same thing of like, it's the other thing I always talk about on this podcast is I've realized recently that everything comes down to communication. And we need to keep those communication channels as open as possible, because that's how we learn about different communities. That's how we learn about people, learn about what makes them tick, what's a stressor for them and things like that. It's such a powerful thing. And it's only something I've really realized recently of like, every problem comes from bad communication.
Yeah. And I think there's also like something that I, from working in the space for like nearly 5 years now as an inclusion expert, people are really scared. They're really scared of making a mistake. There's so much out there that they're like, it would just be easy for us to not try. And I'm like, that is the opposite of what I need you to do. I would rather you turn up, make mistakes, but learn from it rather than do nothing. And I think it's getting like, especially in recruitment and HR, it's getting them to understand actually it's fine to admit that you don't know about these things. It's fine to admit that it's out of your experience. You can't know what you don't know, but what you have to do as a consequence is learn and bring people in that will expand your horizon. And that's the problem time and time again. I go into brands and businesses and like C-suite will all look the same. The marketing team, they'll all be carbon copies of each other. And it's like, what you need here is what you don't have. But you will not attract those people, because why would they want to come and work with a team that clearly is insular? And it's about getting people to look outside of themselves. And so again, it's not rocket science and it's not difficult, but it is that block that I come up against time and time again, that businesses just are scared. And until they realize that they are at the whim of their customer, therefore they must represent their customer, they're not going to get anywhere. And, we are not stupid. We will shop with our opinion. So we will leave brands that don't represent us. And that is the thing that I need brands to understand is just because, I was in an insurance firm and they said to me, well, insurance is not really for trans people. And I'm like, I'm sorry. What? I have home insurance. I have car insurance. I have insurance for my small items of jewelry. Yeah. I'm your customer. Who do you think is paying your bills?
Yeah. And also, who are they to judge? Yeah, who are they to judge who uses their products?
Yeah, it's just because trans people don't talk about insurance doesn't mean we don't buy your products. It's everyone is your customer, therefore you should represent everyone in your products. And until you do, it's not equitable.
I would just find that's I never thought about it, but that's just a great concept of but trans people don't talk about it. What? So you're telling me that I need to put a ginger guy on telly to tell you that ginger people need insurance? What?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I work with a brilliant organisation called the Diversity Standards Collective, and something I and the founder Rich talk about a lot is that trans people are boring. Trans people buy dog food, we sweat, we buy deodorant, we make crap decisions, and we forget to do a food order, so we have to go to Sainsbury's after work and put a meal together. We do all these boring things, yet why are we not represented in any of those sectors in advertising, marketing, literature, or conversations? Why are we not ever included? And the same for most people's intersections, it's just not included. Yet we do all of those things, and I just think that brands and businesses are separating the DEI sector of saying, well, that's just not for us right now. And it's you are in that sector is you, we are all that sector. And it's until people realize that they don't need to separate these issues and actually integrate these issues, that's when the needle will move for positive change. But that is a block that I come up time and time against of individuals and businesses going, well, we just don't need to talk about it because it's not a problem for us. And it's yes, it is. Yeah. Whether you think it is or not, yes, it is. It will always be, yes.
And I think one of the most powerful things to come of that as well is people don't realize how powerful a diverse team is. And I think one of the most undervalued skills is lived experience. Yeah. Because you'll be able to provide a completely different context if you're from a different background. So take me, for example, you've got the physical disability side of things. Yes, I can't speak for everyone with disabilities or physical disabilities anyway, but I can bring something different that you might not have been aware of. Same if you've got anyone that's non-binary, same that you've got someone from a different country. And I think there's so much power in all those different communities. One of the really simple ones was I was in a team once and we were working with a customer that only spoke Turkish.
Yep.
And then my colleague rocks up oh, by the way, because I've got family from Turkey, I speak Turkish. So it was kind of oh, slot that in. That's a skill. And people don't realize these little tiny skills that I'd say knowing a different language isn't a tiny skill, but these little skills that all add into a perfect mix and a perfect thing. Because a diverse team as well is so much more adaptable.
Yeah.
Versatile, and also a diverse working structure is also really powerful because we've seen a big shift of COVID. So before COVID, no one and their nan could work from home.
Yeah.
After COVID, everyone can. Fast forward another 4 years, everyone's oh, we should really get people back in the office just because it looks good. But then there's the debate of now disabled people who can't get into the office are now having to argue about not doing the 2 days in the office despite the office not being accessible. It's just
it's a mess.
It's a nightmare. And I think we are getting better. And I think as well, like you've said, we need to allow people to make mistakes. And one thread that I wanted to pull on to sort of highlight that we are all human one of my big challenges, and I've said this to my friend who is also non-binary, is I'm constantly misgendering them. Not on purpose. It's just because I've known them as another gender for a long time. And it's something that my anxiety drives me nuts with, because I'm like, I don't want to do it, but I know I'm going to make the mistake. So what has your journey been with, like, what is your opinion on misgendering? Because to be honest, I've never really opened the conversation. And I feel like, as well, as someone that's not in that space, that's a fear that a lot of people have, is like, we don't want to, it's that whole thing, like we see it with disability of like, you're a wheelchair. Yes, I'm a wheelchair user, Darren. It's fine. You can say that. Yes.
I think the conversations around pronouns I get it. It can be really tricky. But one thing I promise you, as uncomfortable as you feel, the person on the other side of the equation has felt much more uncomfortable about it. Like, having to assert your pronouns when no one else has is really uncomfortable, and it can lead to tricky interactions. Like, I'm an inclusion expert and I still find it awkward having to ask about pronoun protocol. I find that uncomfortable and I don't enjoy it. The biggest thing to do is, I only want to know that you are trying your best. I only care that you are trying your best. I do not mind that you make mistakes. I don't think it matters that anyone makes a mistake. What I don't enjoy is when someone repeatedly does it and will not take it on board that is wrong. That's phase number one. That's terrible. That's not great. That smells of ignorance to me. So if you keep doing it, I'm just going to shut you down and I'm going to move on. I do expect you to apologize. I think that's really important. Even if I'm not in the room, I still think you should correct yourself, apologize, and move on. I think that's really important. Just when I'm not there doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about it. I don't think it's acceptable. I think I see it a lot when we don't like someone and we think it's acceptable to misgender them with pronouns. Still not right. We still respect them. I think one of the things as well is that I get it's uncomfortable, but I don't think you need me to soothe your soul. So there doesn't need to be this huge effusive apology. It's as simple as, I'm so sorry, I'll use the correct pronouns, I'm really working on it, and we just move on. Because let's be honest, we're busy. We really are just trying to, I need to go to the co-op, I need to get some milk. I don't want to stand here and talk for 15 minutes about how you're a good person, and I know that you've got trans friends, and I know that you're not going to get it wrong again, and I know, and it's just like, just say sorry and let's move on, because it's not a big deal. It is a big deal in the way that it affirms and makes me feel comfortable, but also, like, a really good top tip, if you're scared about pronouns or you're finding pronouns really difficult, there's this really like wacky and like nouveau technique. Just use a person's name, because that's all pronouns are. They're a replacement structure. And so just start getting comfortable with using a person's name, and eventually you'll get there. But it's a learning process, and no one is perfect overnight. I've misgendered people. I do it, and I still have people in my life that misgender me, and we move. It's fine. It's not, but it is. And it's just like, let's just get on with it. Like, I'm bored already of this conversation.
Not that I'm seeking an excuse, but one thing I did become curious about, because a friend highlighted it to me, and I was like, that is an interesting thing. I wonder if that has an impact. He was like, oh, I wonder if it's because of being dyslexic and that whole interpreting information and something new taking longer to absorb. I wondered if there was a part of it. I mean, I don't know whether it's something you've considered, Ben, of that, whether that's part of it. I might be chatting purely out of my arse right now, but it was just an interesting thing that they pointed out, and I went, never thought about it like that.
I've never thought about it like that either. I think that it can be I find it difficult to process things sometimes, and like, I need people to explain it to me differently. I've never thought about it in terms of that. That's really, really interesting.
It was one of those things that my friend said, and I went, that actually makes a lot of sense.
It does. It does.
So there, food for thought, guys. I will clip this up and put it in the comments and see what you think.
Perfect.
It's so true though, and I think we've talked about a lot there of like allowing people to make mistakes, and I think as well people can see people that are working in the space as infallible, and I'm hoping that discussion we've just had sort of shows that we aren't. And as I say, that I kind of thought it as you were going through, saying that this is something that makes me feel really nervous. Like when Ben joined the call, I was like, whatever you do, don't get it wrong. Do not do it. And it's such a big thing of like going through the thought process, like particularly in conversations like this, where I'm conscious that it's being recorded, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Your brain's like over here going through like layers of information and then going, all right, now we actually have to get those words out. That's going to be fun.
Yeah. I think it's like really important to remember, like, as well, it won't be the worst thing that's happened to me this week. It won't be the worst thing that's happened to me this year. Like, it's fine. Like, I genuinely give yourself the gift of good enough. Like, honestly, I know that you're not a bully. And I know, like, if someone, like 95% of people that get a pronoun wrong, you're not doing it to be an asshole. You're not doing it to wound. It's hard. Like, these are pre-programmed settings. Like, so say someone's pregnant. Our immediate question is, well, what are you having? Like, we don't even really care about the answer, but we just ask it.
Yeah.
We are stuck in systems that program us to ask these things and think these things and view people and place expectations on them. It's not you that's the problem. As with most things, it's the system. So just grant yourself the gift of, as long as you're doing good enough, no one will hold it against you. I can't speak for everyone, but I certainly won't.
I think it's also that power of like improvement, constant improvement. No one's perfect. Yeah. And I think sometimes we forget that statement is no one's perfect, no one's infallible, and allowing people to make mistakes. And I think that's another culture thing as well. We need to pick people up on mistakes, but then also not make it a big thing, because I mean, not that we should never make anyone feel bad, but also it's that whole thing of treat people how you want to be treated.
Yeah, like, it's really interesting because I'm a people pleaser, and it's like, how do I acknowledge my own feelings whilst also protecting other people's? And it's, do you know what? I can't control every element of every conversation, but I know what my intentions are, and I will always work from, well, this was my intention. If it didn't cause the result I wanted, how do we build on that and move forwards? And I think it's something that I'm always trying to learn. I am thirsty for knowledge, and every time like I update something, or every time I like swap out bits of information, I'll point out I've only known about this 6 months, or I only recently read about this, as a way of saying, actually, just because I'm an expert doesn't mean you can't go out and do the work for yourself as well, if that makes sense.
100%. And on that note of like mistakes, what are some of the common misconceptions when it comes to speaking of non-binary and that whole journey? What are some of the things some of the naive comments that you get? I get them for disability. We all get them. And I think it's important to highlight.
I think people want me to put a pin in where my gender sits. They want me to give you a finite answer. And I know it's annoying, but the term non-binary, the label non-binary, really, and, you know, trans as well as an umbrella term, it's not fixed for a reason. And that's why I'm using that descriptor for myself. And I think sometimes as well, people who are new to the subject are like, oh, so it's 50-50. If you think about male is blue, female is pink, I'm going to give you purple. Like, no, I am not serving Tinky Winky, the purple Teletubby. It's a really unique gender experience, and I can't pin it down for you. And guess what? I don't want to, because I don't have to. But I think it's this expectation that I should. And then another one that I've only really recently started talking about it, but I had a tricky situation in a work setting where I did like a pride session for a brand and a business. And then afterwards they had like this party because it was during pride season. And so I kind of had to go. And the CEO of this business that had worked with huge brands, he just turned to me and said, I can't take you seriously as a trans person because you've not changed your name. And I was like, it really threw me. And then for the next 10 minutes, they proceeded to talk to me about how I could change my name and what I could change it to. And it's like, you don't get to own my journey with my gender. Like, I can't explain it to you, but my name in the context of me is genderless. I don't care what you think or expect. I don't care who you know has the same name. For me, that is what it means. And I think the biggest like takeaway that anyone can take about it is do not put yourself on me in terms of your expectations and expect me to fit, because I'm not. And when you push people into boxes, they tend to respond like a caged animal. We're not going to like it. So don't be surprised that we are less than receptive to your words.
I think I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's something I always say is I never get this whole debate of like, oh, they shouldn't be allowed to be called this. They should be called this. Why do we have to do this? Does it affect you? No. Yeah. Just do it. Like, it's like, no, I'd much rather someone feels comfortable. We have a comfortable interaction. We have a good day. Cool. Move on. Rather than like, oh, I'm just going to open this big debate and make you feel really uncomfortable. What's the point? We're all here to have a good time. Like,
yeah, I get asked about like what my utopia would be. And it's really simple. It's, you don't have to understand me, but you respect me enough to give me the space to live. Yeah. And that's all I want. People are so complex. We can never understand them fully, but what we can give them is respect and space. And we can just get out of other people's lives a little bit, like leave each other alone a little bit. Like if we are anything other than what you consider to be normal, fine, but leave us alone. Right? Yeah. It's just so simple. We want to live our lives how we want to live our lives. Done.
Yeah. 100%. And I think it's just that whole thing of people overcomplicate it. They over-egg it, overcomplicate it. I mean, we all do it. I've just done it there with the whole pronoun thing. That is something that's constantly there. But it's that whole thing of, as you say, treat people how they want to be treated. And then it's just, it's horrible because I don't want to discredit it, be like, oh, but because then that makes our interaction easy, blah blah blah. Why shouldn't we be having the difficult conversations? Yeah, it's the same argument when we talk about disability. Have the difficult conversations when they're necessary. If they're not necessary,
when they're appropriate,
move on.
But just in the street on a difficult day, no. I think, it's not as simple as boiling it all down to basic human decency. But for most interactions, yes, it is. It absolutely is. When it's the right time to have that conversation and it's the right place, yes. But if you're just experiencing us on a Thursday afternoon, we don't have to talk about everything.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And then also it's just, it's a difficult one because I welcome the conversation of disability when I'm out in public, but it's that whole thing of like, the first thing someone asks you, Ben, is like, oh, you're dressed differently. You identify differently. Let's talk about that. And it's like, why don't we talk about an interest that we both have, whether that's a TV program that's on, whether that's football, whether that's this, whether that's that. Why does the default is, and the worst thing is I kind of get it because it's like, it's a different conversation starter. And I get that, the whole thing of like, look, we've all discussed the Chelsea scores at the pub. We've all discussed the Game of Thrones series. We've all done that dance. So this is something different, something strange to someone, something. So that becomes the discussion topic, but also make sure it's in a comfortable setting that the individual's comfortable with discussing that topic. Because some people, like, I'm weird. I still weirdly like it because I love those strange interactions of watching people's brains go, didn't know that.
Yeah, it depends if I have the energy. If I have the energy, I will absolutely do my level best to leave that person in a better situation education-wise. But some days I just don't have the energy and I just don't do those questions. I'll just be like, I just don't want to talk about that. And it's really difficult as well because you don't want to piss people off because what if I'm the first trans person they've met? But it's like, we've all got a phone in our hand. Yeah. Google your damn questions, Darren. I'm not on the clock right now.
It's a really interesting thing because that's something I actually talk about a lot is my belief that you have a responsibility as a disabled person to educate where you can. And while there is the debate of like, oh, I shouldn't always have to educate people and I don't have to be in the mood. I think I feel that there is the response of if someone has a negative interaction with someone with a disability and I am that person, that is
Yeah.
unfortunate. People are naive, and that is unfortunately the brush that they'll brush everyone with a disability
Yeah.
with. And that's
True.
a weird responsibility that I feel like I have to hold. And people are like, but that's not your job. That's not this, that's not that. But I'm like, I would rather have that thought process and protect my community rather than not. And I think that's a really strange thing for me to say, because I've opened this discussion a lot on the pod and got different viewpoints, and I haven't been able to shake this whole thing of, but I still feel that responsibility.
Yeah. I think it goes back to something I said earlier on. It's like, you don't have to be there every day. And some days you can have a day off, and it's that relay race. Is that, like, not to boil it down too simply, but you're not the only one in that space talking about it. Just like I'm not the only trans non-binary person. Like, we don't have to be there every day. And I don't think you should push yourself so hard. I don't think you should. I think it's brilliant that you have that conscientious, and I've definitely done it to myself before. You will burn out. It is not good for you.
No, it's really hard because I sit there and go, I just wouldn't want the one day. I mean, it's not, one day off isn't going to kill us. And that's the approach I take with a lot of other things.
True.
But with this one thing, I'm like,
I get it.
I don't want to be the reason. I don't want to be the reason. And also it comes back to the core belief that we said earlier of like, treat people how they want to be treated.
Yeah.
And I think it's purely, I always think it's people's curiosity. I'm different. I'm weird, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So I can't judge someone for going, I've never seen a ginger guy before. Let me ask him a question.
Yeah.
And it's a weird, it's something I've not, as I said, it's something I've not been able to shake, because several people have come on here and gone, it's not your responsibility.
Yeah.
But I just, can't shake it.
There you go. And that's that then.
But on the note of like education, what would you say to a young person on the beginning of their journey of discovering themselves? What advice do you wish you had when you were going through it?
Oh my God, what a question. Don't say no, don't limit yourself. But also, in the same space, it doesn't have to be done right now. It doesn't have to be done all at once. Consider your safety. You don't owe anyone coming out an explanation. It is yours to work with until you're comfortable. And I always sort of say, get yourself comfortable first and then deal with how other people are going to treat you. And I think it's so much easier to deal with other people when you're comfortable within yourself. And that's not the easiest option, and it's not the quickest option, but it leaves you better protected. And I wish I could be like, no, just go out tomorrow and be yourself. But it's, understand the world's not like that. You can't do that. And we're in the West, and it's easier here. It's so much worse in other places, but still, our safety is still important to me. So it's operate with kindness and consider your safety.
What about, and I say this is an assumption, what would you say to someone who's quite nervous of leaning into possibly the possibility that they might be non-binary and they want to lean into it, but they're quite scared of it? What advice would you give her that? And that's an assumption that I imagine people would go through of like, this is different. I don't want to do that because then if I do that, then I've got to have these conversations and X, Y, Z.
Yeah. And I totally understand it. And as difficult and scary as some of those conversations are that you might have to have with yourself or your family or friends, it's worth it because you are so much more yourself on the other side of it. It's an expansive gift. And as with everything in life, there's good bits and bad bits, but it is so worth it. It's just worth it. And even if down the line things change and your story with yourself and your understanding with yourself change, so what? It's still worth exploring it. If you even have the faintest inkling of, am I, should I, could I? Yes, try, explore. Nothing bad will come out of it, I promise you.
I think that's a lesson for everyone. Try more things. Yeah. But thank you so much for coming on. I just want to ask the last question that we ask every guest, which is, what's one piece of politically correctness you really strongly agree with or disagree with?
That being woke is a bad thing. I like being called woke. I think like people are like so dismissive of it, and it's like, oh, it's all woke now. It's like, yeah, We are awake. We are thinking. So I see it as a badge of honor when someone calls me work. I'm like, fuck yeah. Like, hell yeah. I don't think it's I just don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think we could find better ways of describing it, but woke is good. Woke is nothing but trying to do better for other people.
100%. And I think as well, the whole thing with that is it's used in the wrong context a lot of times. And then that's where it gets its bad name from. And that's where I think we do need to do better of what is being woke. And as I say, it's that whole thing of people just not being willing to learn and being naive. Whereas, like we've said, one of the biggest things we need to learn is allow people to make mistakes and then allow people to learn, because you only know what you know. And I couldn't agree with that more. But thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for being so open, so honest, and just a nice person overall. And of course, if you do want to get in contact with Ben, I will link all of their details below so you can check them out. And also I'll link their book and everything else as well. So please do check them out. But thank you so much for coming on, Ben.
Oh, Charlie, thank you. It was an utter pleasure. What a nice way to spend my evening.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Not Quite Podcast. Please make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram to get regular updates about the podcast. These